"Can you give me a hug, please?" a poor girl asked the single dad. His reaction left her in tears. Cars moved slowly through the small street, their headlights blinking on as the sun disappeared behind old buildings. Outside a modest grocery store, people came and went, carrying plastic bags filled with daily needs. It was an ordinary place, the kind where nothing special was supposed to happen. Among the last customers was a man named Daniel. He was in his late 30s, tall but slightly bent forward, as if years of responsibility had gently pushed his shoulders down. His face looked tired, yet calm. There were faint lines near his eyes, not from age, but from long nights and unspoken worries. Daniel was a single father, raising his 7-year-old son on his own since his wife had passed away years earlier. Life had not been easy, but he had learned how to move forward without complaining. Daniel lived by routine. Every day followed almost the same pattern. He woke up early, prepared breakfast, helped his son get ready for school, and then went to work. After work, he picked his son up, cooked dinner, helped with homework, and made sure everything was ready for the next day. It was a simple life, but it required strength, patience, and constant focus. That evening, Daniel had stopped by the grocery store after work. He bought bread, milk, eggs, and a small chocolate bar for his son as a surprise. It wasn't much, but he liked seeing his child smile over little things. As he stood in line, he checked his watch, thinking about dinner and whether his son had finished his homework at the neighbor's place. When Daniel stepped outside the store, a cold breeze brushed past him. He pulled his jacket closer and walked toward his car. That was when he noticed her. She was standing a short distance away near the side of the building. At first, he thought she was waiting for someone. She looked small, maybe 10 or 11 years old. Her clothes were worn and a bit too big, as if they once belonged to someone else. Her shoes were old, and the laces were tied in uneven knots. She held her arms close to her body, trying to stay warm. Daniel did not stare, but something about her made him slow down. Maybe it was the way she kept looking at the ground, or the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clearly nervous. People passed by her without noticing. Some glanced quickly and looked away. No one stopped. Daniel hesitated. He had learned to mind his own business. Life had taught him that getting involved could sometimes bring trouble. Still, he felt a quiet concern. He wondered where her parents were, or if someone was supposed to be watching her. He told himself that maybe she was fine, that maybe she was just waiting. He unlocked his car and placed the grocery bag inside. As he closed the door, he noticed movement beside him. The girl had come closer. She stood a few steps away, her hands clenched tightly together. Her head was lowered, and for a moment she said nothing. Daniel felt slightly uncomfortable but remained polite. He gave her a gentle nod, a silent way of asking if she needed something. She looked up slowly. Her eyes were large and tired, filled with something that looked like fear mixed with hope. Her voice was soft, almost shaking when she finally spoke. "Can you give me a hug, please?" The question caught Daniel completely off guard. He froze where he stood, his hand still resting on the car door. For a second he thought he had misunderstood. He looked around, half expecting someone else to appear, maybe a parent or an older sibling. But there was no one. Just the passing cars, the glowing store sign, and the quiet night. Daniel's heart began to beat faster, his mind filled with thoughts all at once. Why would a child ask a stranger for a hug? Was this safe? How would this look to others? What if someone misunderstood his intentions? He had spent years being careful, especially after becoming a single father. He was always aware of how the world judged actions, even kind ones. He also thought about his son. If his child were alone somewhere, asking strangers for comfort, it would break his heart. But at the same time, he knew how careful adults had to be. The girl stood still, watching his face closely, as if trying to read his thoughts. Her hope began to fade with each passing second of silence. Daniel cleared his throat. He wanted to say something kind, something reassuring, but his words felt stuck. He noticed her hands trembling slightly. She looked cold, tired, and unsure. He gently shook his head. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I don't think that's a good idea." His voice was calm, not angry, but firm. He took a small step back, creating space between them. He thought that was the responsible thing to do. The girl's face changed instantly. Her lips pressed together and her eyes filled with tears she tried hard to hold back. She nodded quickly, as if she already knew the answer and felt silly for asking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to bother you." She turned away, wiping her face with the sleeve of her jacket. Her shoulders began to shake as she walked a few steps away, trying to hide her tears. Daniel stood there, feeling a strange tightness in his chest. He hadn't expected her reaction to hurt him this much. He watched her small figure move back toward the side of the building, curling into herself as if trying to disappear. For a moment he told himself to leave. He had done nothing wrong. He had been careful, respectful, and responsible. Still, something felt unfinished. The sound of her quiet crying stayed with him, louder than the noise of the street. He thought about his own child again. He remembered nights when his son had cried after bad dreams, asking for comfort. Daniel had always been there, holding him until the fear passed. He knew how powerful a simple hug could be. Daniel remained beside his car, caught between caution and compassion. He looked at the grocery bag, then back at the girl. The world felt still, as if waiting for what he would do next. And in that moment, Daniel realized that this was not just an ordinary evening anymore. Something small but important had already begun, something that would stay with him long after this night was over. Daniel stayed where he was, his hand slowly slipping off the car door. The girl's quiet crying echoed in his ears, even though the street was still busy with normal sounds. He told himself to breathe, to stay calm, but his thoughts were moving too fast. He had reacted on instinct, the kind built from years of being careful. As a single father, he had learned that the world could be kind, but it could also be quick to judge. One wrong move, one misunderstood moment, and everything he worked so hard to protect could fall apart. That fear had guided his reaction more than his heart had. He watched the girl from a distance. She stood near the wall now, her back slightly turned. She tried to wipe her tears again, but they kept coming. She wasn't loud or dramatic. Her pain was quiet, almost invisible, the kind people often miss because it doesn't demand attention. A couple walked past her, talking and laughing, not noticing her at all. Another man stepped out of the store, glanced at her, then looked away. Life moved on around her as if she didn't exist. Daniel felt a strong pull inside him, something uncomfortable and heavy. He wanted to leave, to drive home and return to his routine. That would be easy. That would be safe. But his feet wouldn't move. His mind replayed the moment she had spoken, the way her voice shook. The way she had looked at him, not with expectation but with a kind of quiet hope, as if she already knew the answer might be no. He asked himself again why she had asked him. Not someone else. Not a woman, him. Maybe it was because he looked tired but kind. Maybe it was because he reminded her of someone she once trusted. Or maybe it was just chance. Whatever the reason, he felt the weight of that moment settle deeper in his chest. Daniel ran a hand through his hair and looked around. The parking lot lights buzzed softly above him. The air smelled like cold pavement and bread from the store. Everything looked normal, yet he felt like he was standing in the middle of something important. He remembered a time years ago, shortly after his wife had passed away. He had taken his son to the park. His son had fallen while playing and scraped his knee. Daniel had rushed to him, lifting him without thinking, holding him tightly while his son cried into his shoulder. In that moment, nothing else had mattered. Not people watching. Not what anyone might think. Just his child's pain. The memory made his throat tighten. Daniel looked back at the girl. She had stopped crying now, but her face was red, and she hugged herself tightly, as if trying to replace the comfort she had hoped for. He felt regret rise slowly, not loud or sharp, but deep. He wondered if he had hurt her more than he had meant to. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't been unkind. Still, rejection can hurt even when it's gentle. He thought about how brave she must have been to ask. It wasn't easy for a child to approach a stranger. It took courage, especially when life had already taught her disappointment. Daniel took a small step forward, then stopped. His fear returned just as quickly. What if he made things worse? What if she felt embarrassed? What if someone misunderstood again? He stood there, caught between two sides of himself. One side reminded him of rules, boundaries, and caution. The other reminded him of humanity, kindness, and moments when rules bend to make space for compassion. The girl slowly turned her head, noticing that he was still there. For a second their eyes met. She looked surprised, almost unsure, as if she didn't expect him to still be watching. Daniel offered a small, awkward smile. Not a happy one, just a gentle sign that he wasn't angry. She looked away again, uncertain. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. Words felt difficult. He didn't want to scare her or confuse her. He didn't want to promise something he couldn't give. Instead, he took another step closer, stopping at a respectful distance. His voice was calm and low when he finally spoke. "Are you okay?" he asked. The girl shrugged slightly, still not facing him. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice clearly said otherwise. Daniel nodded, even though he knew it wasn't true. "I didn't mean to upset you," he said. I wasn't expecting that." She stayed quiet. Her silence spoke more than words. Daniel sighed softly. "You didn't do anything wrong," he added. "It was okay to ask." That made her turn toward him again. Her eyes were wet, but there was a flicker of curiosity now. "Then why did you say no?" she asked quietly. The question was honest, not angry. It caught Daniel off guard again, but in a different way. He thought carefully before answering. "Sometimes grown-ups get scared of doing the wrong thing," he said, "even when they want to help." She seemed to think about that. "I wasn't asking for anything bad," she said, almost as if she needed to defend herself. "I know," Daniel replied quickly. "I believe you." Those words seemed to matter. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. They stood there in silence again, but it felt different now. Less tense, more open. Daniel looked at the time. He knew his son would be waiting soon, but he also knew that some moments deserved patience. He glanced at the grocery bag in his car, then back at the girl. "Have you eaten today?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then shook her head. Daniel nodded, as if that answered many unspoken questions. "I have some food," he said. "If you want, I can get you something warm to eat." She looked unsure again, clearly used to being disappointed. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," Daniel replied, "but I want to." She studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she saw seemed to ease her worry. She nodded slowly. Daniel felt a small sense of relief. He wasn't fixing everything. He wasn't solving her life. But he was doing something, and that mattered. As they walked back toward the store together, Daniel realized how close he had come to driving away. How easy it would have been to ignore that feeling in his chest. He understood now that his first reaction had been about fear, not lack of care. And while fear had its place, it shouldn't always be the final voice. Behind them, the street continued as always. But for Daniel and the girl, the moment had already changed something inside them both, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. The girl's steps were small and hesitant as she followed Daniel back toward the grocery store. She kept her eyes down, twisting the hem of her worn jacket, as if afraid to look up. Daniel noticed how careful she was, how fragile her movements seemed. It was as if each step she took required more courage than most people would imagine. Daniel had never been around children in such a situation. His own son had never had to rely on strangers for comfort or help. He felt a mixture of worry and sadness, realizing that this little girl carried burdens he could barely imagine. She seemed to live in a world where warmth and safety were rare, and where a simple hug could mean more than words ever could. As they entered the small store, Daniel kept a respectful distance, allowing her to choose whatever she needed. The girl glanced around nervously. The store smelled of bread, fresh vegetables, and cleaning supplies, but also carried a faint chill that made the girl shiver slightly. She looked small and out of place, almost like she didn't belong there at all. Daniel quietly followed her, noticing how she hesitated at each aisle. Her eyes darted nervously toward the other shoppers, then back at the shelves. She picked up a loaf of bread, held it for a moment, then set it back. She picked up a small carton of milk, examining it as if it were the most precious item in the world. "Take your time," Daniel said softly. "You don't have to hurry." The girl nodded but didn't look at him. Her lips pressed together and her fingers twisted the edge of the milk carton. There was a carefulness in her movements, a caution learned from experience, not fear. Daniel realized that she had likely spent most of her life being careful, always aware of the dangers and disappointments around her. Finally, she picked up a small package of bread, a few eggs, and a piece of fruit. Daniel added a chocolate bar from his own groceries. "This is for you," he said gently. "You deserve it." The girl looked at him, eyes wide as if she couldn't believe it. "I thank you," she whispered. Her voice was quiet, but there was a sincerity in it that Daniel felt deeply. He guided her toward the counter, making sure she could reach everything without difficulty. As the cashier rang up the items, the girl's hands trembled slightly. Daniel realized that this small transaction, something most people took for granted, was something she had rarely experienced. There was dignity in the act, and he felt honored to help her with it. When they stepped outside again, the air was colder now, and the streetlights glowed softly over the pavement. The girl clutched the bag of food to her chest as if it were a treasure. Daniel noticed how her eyes lingered on the bag, not for the contents, but perhaps for the sense of care it represented. "Do you have somewhere to go now?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated. She looked down at her shoes, then shook her head. I don't know," she admitted softly. Daniel felt a pang in his chest. He had feared this answer. He had suspected it might be something like this, and now it was real. He thought about his own son, who had a warm bed and a loving home. The contrast made his heart ache for the little girl standing before him. "You don't have to go anywhere right now," Daniel said. "Do you want to sit for a while, just until you feel better?" The girl nodded slowly, then followed him to a nearby bench. They sat side by side, though Daniel made sure to leave a small space between them, careful to respect boundaries. The girl held her bag tightly, her shoulders hunched, as if the weight of the world rested on them. Daniel said nothing at first. Words felt unnecessary. He simply sat there, letting her presence exist without pressure. Slowly, he realized that she needed more than food. She needed someone to see her, to acknowledge her pain, even without judgment. "You know," Daniel said softly after a moment, "sometimes life is really hard. And sometimes people forget to be kind, but it doesn't mean there's no hope." The girl looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time in minutes. Her gaze was cautious, yet something in it flickered like a small light struggling to survive. "Hope?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Daniel replied. "Even when things feel impossible, hope is still there. You just have to hold on to it." The girl nodded slowly. She didn't say anything, but Daniel could tell that his words had reached her in some way. The way her shoulders relaxed just a little, the way her grip on the bag loosened slightly. It was progress, small but real. Daniel thought about how important these small moments were. He had spent his life focused on big responsibilities, deadlines, and work. He had been careful with people, careful with words, careful with his actions. But sometimes the smallest gestures could make the biggest difference. A loaf of bread, a warm chocolate bar, a kind word, a gentle presence. These were the things that could change a life, even if only a little. He glanced at her again, noticing the fine strands of hair falling across her forehead. Her eyes were tired, yet still bright in their own way. She seemed to carry the weight of too many days without comfort, yet there was resilience in her small frame. Daniel felt a deep respect for her courage, the courage it took to ask for a hug from a stranger. "Can I ask you something?" he said gently. The girl nodded. "Why did you ask me for a hug?" She looked down at her hands. I haven't had one in a long time," she admitted softly. "No one really cares, and I just wanted to feel safe, even for a little bit." Daniel felt his chest tighten. The honesty in her words was painful, yet it also made him admire her bravery. She had asked for what she needed, even knowing it might be rejected. She had reached out when most people would have hidden away. "I understand," Daniel said quietly. "I really do." They sat in silence again, the street around them moving on as if nothing unusual had happened. But for Daniel and the girl, the world had shifted slightly. Something small and powerful had begun, something invisible yet real. After a few minutes, Daniel spoke again. "Do you want to talk about your day?" The girl hesitated, then nodded. She told him in soft, halting words about the small struggles she faced at home, about hunger, loneliness, and fear. She didn't mention anyone by name, only situations. Daniel listened carefully, without interruption or judgment. He felt the importance of simply being present, of allowing her to share her truth. As she spoke, Daniel felt a mixture of emotions, sadness, empathy, and determination. He wanted to help, but he knew he couldn't fix everything. What he could do was offer kindness, understanding, and a moment of comfort she desperately needed. Finally, the girl finished speaking, exhausted but a little lighter than before. Daniel nodded gently. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That took courage." She looked at him, eyes wide. "Really?" she asked, unsure if she had done the right thing. "Yes," Daniel replied. "It really did." For the first time that evening, a small smile appeared on her face. It was hesitant and fragile, but it was there. Daniel felt a warmth in his chest, the kind that comes from knowing you've done something meaningful, even if small. He realized that this encounter, which had begun with fear and hesitation, was transforming into something deeper. It was about trust, compassion, and the quiet power of human connection. He didn't know what would happen next, but he understood that this moment was important, and that it mattered that he had chosen to stay. The girl held the bag of food, her small hands now more relaxed. She looked up at Daniel and said quietly, "Thank you for listening. I feel a little better." Daniel smiled gently. "I'm glad," he said, "and you can feel better even more, one step at a time. You're stronger than you know." The night continued around them, lights flickering, cars passing, people moving on with their routines. But for the girl and Daniel, the world had changed slightly. There was a sense of hope, small but real. There was a connection born from honesty, care, and the willingness to be present for another human being. Daniel knew this was only the beginning. He didn't know how much he could help, or what challenges she faced. But he had taken the first step, and sometimes that was enough to start healing wounds that had been hidden for too long. The girl sat quietly, a small but growing trust forming between them. Daniel stayed with her, understanding that his presence, his patience, and his willingness to listen were just as important as anything else he could do. And in that quiet moment, Daniel realized something profound. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness, the simplest gestures of attention and care, can change someone's world in ways that words alone cannot describe. Daniel stayed on the bench beside the girl, the cold evening air wrapping around them. The glow from the streetlights cast soft shadows on the pavement, and the distant hum of traffic felt like the background music of their quiet, unusual moment. He watched her closely, noticing the way her small shoulders had relaxed just a little since she had first asked for a hug. Even the tiniest shift in her posture seemed significant to him, a sign that she was beginning to feel safe, if only for a short while. The girl held the small grocery bag tightly on her lap, but her fingers were no longer twisting the edges like they had been earlier. She kept glancing at Daniel now, curiosity flickering in her eyes. It was as if she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. Daniel, sensing her hesitation, gave her a gentle smile. "You don't have to say anything," he told her softly. "Just sitting here is enough." She looked at him then, a small, almost shy smile forming on her lips. For a moment the world seemed to slow. Daniel realized that in her life there probably weren't many moments like this, moments where someone simply sat with her, without rushing, without judging, without asking for anything in return. After a few minutes, Daniel broke the silence. "I'm curious," he said carefully. "Can I ask you a question?" The girl nodded slowly, clutching the bag a little less tightly. "Why did you ask me for a hug earlier?" Daniel asked. His voice was quiet, gentle, and full of sincerity. The girl looked down at her shoes. She twisted them slightly as if gathering courage. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. I haven't had a hug in a long time. No one ever really hugs me, and I just wanted to feel safe." Daniel felt a sharp pang in his chest. He thought about how his son, who was often shy about showing emotions, would sometimes curl up next to him after a bad dream. How he had always tried to be there for his son, holding him until the fear passed. And now here was a girl, small and fragile, asking for the simplest human comfort, and he had almost let fear guide his response. "I see," Daniel said softly. "I understand now. I should have realized that before." The girl's eyes met his, and he noticed a mixture of surprise, relief, and still a little doubt. "Really?" she asked. "Really," Daniel replied. "I know now that what you asked for wasn't wrong, it was brave, and it's okay to want to feel safe." Her lips quivered slightly as she nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek. Daniel reached into his pocket for a handkerchief and handed it to her. She took it quietly, dabbing at her eyes, still looking at him with cautious hope. They sat together for a while in silence. The night seemed colder now, but the warmth of the shared moment made the chill feel less sharp. Daniel realized how much a single act of understanding, even small, could matter. The girl's trust, tentative as it was precious. After a moment, Daniel spoke again. "Do you have a place to go tonight?" he asked carefully, not wanting to push her. The girl shook her head. "No," she whispered, "I don't have anywhere." Daniel's heart tightened. He knew the world could be harsh, especially for children. And he understood that the girl had probably learned not to trust adults, not to expect kindness. Yet here she was, still brave enough to ask for a hug from a stranger. "You don't have to go anywhere right now," he said gently. "We can sit here for a while if you like." She nodded, and for the first time that evening, she relaxed slightly, leaning back against the bench. Daniel could feel her small sigh of relief, the kind that comes from realizing that someone has chosen to stay and care, even for just a little while. He thought about what he could do to help her further. He knew he couldn't solve all her problems, couldn't take away the challenges she faced every day. But he could offer a moment of kindness, a bit of guidance, and maybe, just maybe, a reminder that not all people in the world would let her down. Daniel reached into the bag he had brought from the store. "Here," he said, handing her the chocolate bar. "It's not much, but it's for you." The girl's eyes widened. She looked at the chocolate, then back at him. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling a little. "You're welcome," Daniel replied, smiling gently. "Sometimes little things can make a big difference." She unwrapped the chocolate and took a small bite, savoring it slowly. Daniel noticed how her posture relaxed even further. He felt a quiet sense of relief. He realized that small acts of kindness, like giving someone a piece of chocolate or simply listening to them, could have a profound impact. After a few moments, he decided to speak again. "Do you want to tell me more about yourself?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated. Her eyes flicked around the street and then back at him. Finally, she nodded. I live nearby," she said quietly, "but it's not really safe at home. I try to stay out until it's dark." Daniel listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. He only nodded, letting her speak at her own pace. "It's hard," she continued. Sometimes I'm hungry. Sometimes I feel invisible. I try to be careful, but I'm always tired. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He couldn't imagine living like that, carrying so much fear and loneliness at such a young age. And yet, here she was, surviving each day, small but resilient. "You're very strong," Daniel said quietly. "It's not easy to get through the things you've been through." She looked at him with wide eyes as if she had never heard anyone say that before. "Strong," she repeated softly. "Yes," Daniel replied. "Even if it doesn't feel like it, you are. You've survived so much already." She thought about that for a moment, then nodded slowly. The weight of her usual fear seemed to lift a little, replaced by a quiet sense of being seen and understood. Daniel realized how powerful listening could be. He didn't need to lecture or fix anything. Simply being present, acknowledging her feelings, and offering a bit of kindness was already helping more than he could have imagined. After a while, he spoke again, more carefully this time. "I know it's not much, but if you want, I can help you find someone who can make sure you're safe and have what you need." The girl's eyes widened. "Really?" she asked, voice trembling. "Yes," Daniel said. "You don't have to go through this alone. There are people who can help. I can take you there if you want." She looked down at the bag of food she held, then back at him. After a moment, she nodded slowly. "Okay," she said quietly. Daniel felt a small sense of hope. He knew this was only the beginning. There were no guarantees that everything would be perfect, that her life would change instantly. But he had taken the first step. He had chosen to listen, to care, and to act. And sometimes that first step was the most important one of all. As they prepared to leave the bench and head toward help, Daniel noticed the small smile returning to her face. It was tentative and fragile, but it was real. He understood that this smile represented trust, hope, and the beginning of healing that had been missing in her life for so long. The night continued around them, quiet and still. But for Daniel and the girl, the world felt slightly different. There was a connection now, something invisible yet undeniable. It was a bond formed from understanding, compassion, and the simple act of choosing to care. Daniel knew that there were still challenges ahead, but he also knew that sometimes the simplest gestures could make the biggest difference. A kind word, a listening ear, a gentle touch of understanding, they could change the course of a life, even in small ways. As they walked toward the next step, Daniel felt a quiet sense of determination. He would help her, guide her, and ensure that she knew she was not alone. And in doing so, he realized that this encounter, which had begun with hesitation and fear, was teaching him something too. That courage and kindness could appear in the most unexpected moments, and that the smallest choices could carry the greatest meaning. For the girl, that evening was no longer just another night of fear and loneliness. It was a night when someone had chosen to see her, to listen, and to offer a small piece of hope. And for Daniel, it was a night that reminded him why it was worth taking risks for the sake of humanity, no matter how small the act might seem. They walked together, two strangers bound by a brief but profound moment, both changed in ways that would last far longer than the night itself. And in that quiet, unremarkable street, a story of trust, courage, and human connection was quietly unfolding, leaving marks on both of their hearts that would not fade easily. Daniel held the grocery bag loosely in one hand as he walked alongside the girl. The night was colder now, but the chill felt less harsh than it had before, as if the warmth of their shared connection was spreading outward. Streetlights cast a soft glow on the pavement, creating long shadows behind them, but neither of them noticed. They were both absorbed in the quiet significance of the moment. The girl walked carefully, her small steps tentative yet determined. Every so often she glanced at Daniel, her eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity, caution, and slowly growing trust. For a child who had learned to rely only on herself, even this tentative bond was enormous. Daniel noticed the way her grip on the grocery bag had loosened compared to earlier. There was a sense of relief in her posture, a subtle easing of tension, like a small weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I'm glad you're still here," the girl said softly after a few minutes. Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried a sincerity that made Daniel pause. "I'm glad I stayed too," Daniel replied gently. "Sometimes it's hard to know what the right thing to do is, but I'm happy I didn't walk away." She looked up at him then, eyes wide and searching. "Do you really mean that?" she asked. "Yes," he said, smiling slightly. "I mean it. You were brave to ask for help, and it was important that I listened." For a moment she looked uncertain, as if she had never expected such a response. Most adults she had encountered either ignored her, told her no, or made her feel she was a burden. But Daniel was different. He had chosen to stay, to care, and to see her. That simple choice carried more meaning than she could put into words. They walked slowly toward a nearby community center, a place Daniel knew provided support for children in need. He had called ahead quietly to make sure someone would be there to help her when they arrived. The girl clutched the grocery bag with one hand, but with the other, she occasionally adjusted her jacket, as if trying to steady herself for the unknown ahead. "You're going to meet some kind people soon," Daniel said softly. "They'll make sure you have a safe place, some food, and someone to talk to whenever you need." She nodded, though her lips pressed together nervously. I'm not used to people helping me," she admitted. Daniel stopped for a moment and knelt down to her level, careful to keep a respectful distance. "I understand," he said gently, "but it's okay to accept help. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you human, and everyone deserves to feel safe and cared for." She looked into his eyes for a long moment. Then finally she said, "Thank you for not walking away." Daniel's chest tightened. Those words, simple as they were, carried more weight than anything he had expected. For this little girl, someone choosing to stay and care had made a difference that went beyond food, shelter, or words. It was about trust, about knowing that at least for a moment, someone saw her, understood her, and chose to help without judgment. As they approached the community center, a warm light spilled out from the doors, casting a welcoming glow onto the cold pavement. Daniel guided her inside and explained quietly to the staff that the girl needed immediate support, a safe place to stay, and a listening ear. The staff members greeted her warmly, and for the first time that evening, the girl's expression shifted from uncertainty to a tentative relief. Daniel watched her as she hesitated, then slowly stepped forward to meet the staff. She clutched the grocery bag to her chest one last time, then set it down as the staff offered her a seat and something warm to eat. The sight filled Daniel with a quiet satisfaction. He couldn't fix everything in her life, but he had given her a first step towards safety, comfort, and care. Before leaving, Daniel knelt once more. "Remember," he said softly, "even small kindnesses matter, and you are stronger than you know. You can face tomorrow and the day after and every day after that. You're not alone." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were different, tears of relief and hope rather than fear and loneliness. She nodded slowly, trying to smile through them. "Thank you," she whispered again. Daniel stood up and smiled gently. "Take care," he said, "and remember it's okay to ask for help when you need it." As he walked away, the weight of the evening settled on him in a quiet way. He felt a mixture of exhaustion and fulfillment, knowing that he had done the right thing, that he had chosen compassion over fear, and that his actions, however small, had changed someone's night, and perhaps much more, forever. Walking back to his car, Daniel reflected on what had just happened. Life had a way of presenting unexpected challenges, moments that forced him to choose between caution and kindness. And in this case, choosing kindness had brought an experience he would carry with him for a long time. He thought about his own son, waiting at home, and how this evening had reminded him of the importance of teaching him not just to survive, but to care. To notice others, to act with empathy, and to understand that sometimes the smallest gestures, like a hug, a listening ear, or sharing a piece of food can leave lasting impressions. By the time Daniel reached his car, the girl was already settled inside the community center, receiving care and warmth. He knew he had made a difference, even if only a small one, and that knowledge carried a quiet satisfaction that words could not capture. Driving home, Daniel allowed himself to breathe fully for the first time that evening. The city lights reflected softly on the windshield, but in his mind, he saw only the small, fragile figure of the girl, clutching her grocery bag, and the faint, hopeful smile she had offered him before stepping inside the community center. He understood that life was unpredictable, often challenging, and sometimes filled with fear. But moments like these, moments where courage and kindness intersected, reminded him of the good that still existed in the world. When he arrived home, his son ran to meet him at the door, eyes wide with excitement. Daniel hugged his son tightly, holding him close, grateful for the warmth and safety of their home. He thought about how different life could be for some children and how fortunate his son was. But he also knew that he had just played a small role in changing the life of another child, someone who had no one else to turn to that evening. After dinner, as he tucked his son into bed, Daniel reflected quietly on the girl's courage. She had asked for a hug, something so simple yet so human. And in doing so, she had reminded him that fear should never outweigh compassion, and that every act of kindness, no matter how small, could have a ripple effect far beyond what one could see. That night, as Daniel lay in bed, he thought about the girl again. He hoped she would feel safe, that she would eat, rest, and slowly begin to believe that the world could be kind. He knew that one evening could not solve all her problems, but it could plant a seed of hope. And hope, he knew, was a powerful thing. The next morning, Daniel woke up with a quiet determination. Life would continue, with all its challenges and responsibilities, but he felt strengthened by the previous night's events. He knew that moments of compassion and courage were never wasted. They lingered, quietly shaping the world, one small act at a time. In the days that followed, Daniel often thought about the girl, hoping that the warmth and care she had received would carry her through the difficult days ahead. He realized that in helping her, he had also changed something inside himself. He had learned that vulnerability could be met with trust, that kindness could overcome fear, and that the smallest gestures of humanity could leave lasting marks. And for the girl, that night would not be forgotten. The hug she had asked for, the gentle words, the food, and the presence of someone who truly saw her, all of these would become a memory of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there were people willing to care. Daniel continued his life, returning to his routines, caring for his son and facing the challenges of each day. But the memory of that evening, the small girl who had asked for a hug and the choice he had made, remained with him. It reminded him that life was not just about survival or responsibility. It was about connection, empathy, and the courage to care. In the end, both Daniel and the girl were changed forever, one by receiving hope and kindness, the other by giving it. And sometimes that was enough to make the world a little brighter, one heart at a time.